Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Monita Rajpal. Thank you for joining us. The tragedy unfolding in Ukraine and the ongoing fallout from the global pandemic are impacting millions of people around the world. The consequences are devastating. COVID has disrupted our lives in so many ways, and now the war in Ukraine has claimed thousands of lives and displaced millions, mainly women and children. All this is having a devastating toll on the mental health, not just the victims, but also on those living far from the conflict. In this special edition of Zurich Talks, we will be tackling this head on. First and foremost, how do we support the brave citizens of Ukraine who are fleeing from their homes for safety? Secondly, let's recognize that these horrendous events do have an impact on us as fellow global citizens. I'm joined now by Zurich's Group Chief Executive Officer, Mario Greco. Mr. Greco, thank you very much for being with us. You are the CEO of one of the largest insurance companies in the world. You employ some 55,000 people. We've experienced unprecedented crises over the last couple of years. Now, first with the pandemic and now with this crisis in Ukraine. You must be incredibly concerned for the well-being of the millions of people in Ukraine that are affected.
This crisis, this war comes after 2 years of pandemic, which has been already devastating for people. We realized back at the beginning of 2020 that one of our duties, being such a healthy, strong company, was to support and help as many people as we can through these challenges. This war is another example of what a company as big as us can do and should do. And so as soon as it started, we tried to gather forces, financial resources, but also people to provide help inside Ukraine and outside the borders. And eventually, we believe that this will also require job solutions, because these people will need to work, and these families will need money.
It's really about balancing the needs, isn't it? From an immediate perspective, then to the mid and long-term perspective. How do you do that?
Well, we are confronting, it's a world which is much more complex than ever before, where catastrophes in a global war that hit everybody, and then governments cannot alone fix these issues. And so it calls also on private companies like we are to stand up and do our job. We're trying to gather forces, financial resources, but also skills and capabilities to help into Ukraine, together with the Red Cross for medical emergency and for these corridors that allow the people to leave the war zones and get to the border. And then as soon as they get to the border, we work with UNICEF and with Save the Children to provide support, especially to the young kids and to the families, because you know that families often get separated. This is a very new world for us, but I think it is an important priority now for a company of our size and our strength to support the challenges that we all have in getting the world together.
Let me ask you a personal question, if I may. The war in Ukraine, how is this impacting you personally?
Well, it's impacting a lot. I mean, I never thought, frankly, that I will see a war nearby. This is a war where you see it constantly, and this is almost unbearable. And, you feel that you ought to do something about it, to stop it, to mitigate, to help the people. And this is what we have in mind from the beginning, that we should gather financial resources, we should gather intellectual resources, we should find out actions, we can influence other companies to do things. And frankly, this is what also drives my days from early on in the morning up until the evening, think about what else we can do to help in these situations.
The work that The Z Zurich Foundation is also work doing with UNICEF is extremely important, both, again, from a humanitarian perspective, in that short, immediate term and the needs that are required there, but then also the mid and long-term psychosocial support as well.
I want to repeat and explain the concept that a company like us has to do these things. This is not about, just being good human beings. This is what a rich, healthy, and wealthy company has to do for the society. And it's really part of the obligations you have.
Mr. Greco, thank you very much for that. Now, in just a minute, we are going to be hearing more detail about the work being done by UNICEF and supported by the Z Zurich Foundation to help the families fleeing war. But first, it is so important to understand the impact of these events on families and children. I'm now joined by someone who has seen this firsthand and knows better than almost anyone how the trauma of war can impact refugees both physically and psychologically. Martin Bell spent 3 decades on the front line as a BBC war correspondent. Now, as a UNICEF ambassador, he has worked personally with many displaced families in refugee camps across the world. Let's see a glimpse of what Martin has done.
A life on the front line. War correspondent, politician, author, and UNICEF ambassador. Martin Bell, OBE, has dedicated his career to highlight humanitarian emergencies. His work, devoted to improve the plight of refugees, in particular children, affected by conflict and natural disaster. Wearing his so-called lucky white suit, Martin Bell has covered wars across the globe during his career, frequently finding himself in the firing line in the pursuit of a story.
Martin Bell hit by shrapnel while securing these pictures.
Now, as a UNICEF ambassador, he goes to parts of the world that are still torn by conflict, but no longer make headline news, to help refugees get access to healthcare, education, safety, and nutrition. And above all, do what he does best. Ensure the most vulnerable people get the support they need and deserve.
And Martin Bell joins us now. Martin, thank you so much for being with us. You have reported from 18 separate conflicts around the world. You have spent a lot of time in some of the most devastating situations with people who are in their most vulnerable. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think the nature of warfare has changed and is changing. It is no longer rival formations clashing on the field of arms. Wars are fought among the people, and the principal casualties more and more are the civilians, just caught up in the middle. And among those civilians, I would say there was one group especially vulnerable. Two groups, actually. There's the very old and the very young. And this is what we are seeing now in Ukraine, with a massive movement of refugees and human suffering on a scale it's difficult to imagine.
The immediate needs for people who are escaping war is to find safety and security. What are the hurdles that they face?
In some places it's very difficult simply to get away from their homes in towns and cities that are being fought for. The roads are unsafe, the skies are unsafe. The hurdles are in some cases almost insurmountable. Especially I think in Ukraine, something has happened that I haven't come across in any of my other wars, which is that families are not only having to flee their homes, but being broken up. So the children are losing their fathers almost at the point of departure, as the fathers stay behind to fight in the war. The children especially are traumatized. I remember being in Somalia. I met an 8-year-old girl who had been bombed out of her home in Mogadishu with her mother and father. The father had been killed by a landmine on the road. By the time she got to the refugee camp where I met her, she was, can I also use the word, zombified? I held her hand. She didn't know who she was or where she was. Now that takes very special psychiatric care to deal with that. And there's no time for that. We can only imagine what these children are going through, but they're going through something that no child should ever have to go through, which includes the loss of their childhoods.
You touched upon this earlier, but I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the long-term impact on these children that conflict has on them from their mental health, emotional health as well. What kind of psychosocial support do they need?
They need very intense and long-lasting psychosocial support. First of all, they need safety, a place where they can get a kind of normality. They can play with each other. They need to be safe. They need to be away from the guns. But the long-term effects, the traumatic effects, will take years. I wouldn't even say to heal. You know the difference between PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, in adults and in children? It's simple. In children, it lasts longer. I would see my own children in the eyes of these children. I thought to myself, whoever's starting these wars, whoever's to blame for them, it's not these young people. But the young people are suffering inordinately, and that is a common feature of all the wars of the world in this time.
Martin, thank you so much. Now we can see exactly how much help and support these refugees, particularly young people, are going to need. As we record this show in late March, over half Ukraine's children are estimated to be displaced. This is more than 4 million young people. UNICEF is one of the biggest aid agencies leading the support effort on the ground. Let's take a look at some of the work they are doing to help families fleeing Ukraine. The executive director of UNICEF, Catherine Russell, who was recently at a UNICEF facility on the Romania-Ukraine border, brings us this message.
Thousands of women and children coming across the border from Ukraine, fleeing the situation there. We have what we call a blue dot facility here, where we do assessments of the people coming across the border. We try to assess their health, their situation of whether they have someplace to live, someplace to stay, whether they have enough food to eat, and we try to help them as they make this very difficult journey. Make sure that the children who are coming across are safe, which is not always an easy thing to determine, but we're working hard to do that. So it's a good place in some senses because the people are happy to be leaving Ukraine, but it's also a sad place for sure because there's so much uncertainty and people are exhausted crossing the border, and they're very happy to have some people greeting them here. The Romanian government has been very welcoming. The community here has been very welcoming. UNICEF is working closely with the government and with other partners to do our very, very best to help these people.
Crucially important work being done there. And now we are joined by Carla Haddad Mardini, Director of Private Fundraising and Partnerships at UNICEF, to tell us more. Carla, hello. We heard there from UNICEF's Executive Director, Catherine Russell, who was on the ground at the Romania-Ukraine border, and she talked about these blue dot safe spaces. Can you tell us a little bit more about them?
The blue dot hubs, as we call them, are spaces that are along the border crossings in neighboring countries to Ukraine, where children and their families can be received, can feel safe, can be supported. They provide services and critical information to children and their families, and they help them in their onward journey.
In terms of the immediate needs of refugees, and when you look at the donations as well, how do you prioritize what goes where and how much goes where?
Inside Ukraine, we're using all the funding we're getting to scale up our support, and we're delivering essential supplies. We have also established mobile child protection teams who are being expanded and are providing protection and psychosocial services to families and their children across Ukraine.
We're focusing on their immediate needs, but then also we don't know how long this conflict is going to go on for. And so that then stretches out immediate needs to midterm and long-term needs. How does that work into the planning?
Right now, we're focusing on the emergency. At the same time, all the funding and support we're getting is about managing the emergency, but also preparing for the next phases. They need psychosocial support. They've been experiencing extreme events, and the trauma is important there. So their well-being is important, and we need to access those children as quickly as we can so that we can manage that situation and they can then get over it and thrive and develop properly.
It is such a crucially important point that you make there. Now, the work that UNICEF does in Ukraine and around the world couldn't be possible without donations, without partnerships such as the one that you have with the Z Zurich Foundation. Tell us a little bit about that one.
We're very proud and excited about the partnership with the Z Zurich Foundation. Because it's focused on the long term. If we look at the situation today of youth, it's quite dramatic. And we think that that partnership could be transformational if we garner the support we need. So we're very, very keen on the creation of a global movement with the Z Zurich Foundation around well-being and mental health, and really bringing on board new partners to support us so that we invest in the long term, not just immediately, and create that platform of support to highlight the needs of children and young people in terms of mental health and prepare them to develop well in the societies we live in.
Carla, Haddad, Mardini, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
As you heard there, major work is already being done to support refugees, but the crisis is showing no signs of going away, and the humanitarian plight is intensifying. UNICEF is doing vital work to support refugees, and the Z Zurich Foundation is supporting this incredible effort. You can find out more by visiting the address on the banner below. With us now to tell us all about this important new initiative, the Global Coalition for Youth Mental Wellbeing, is the chairman of the Z Zurich Foundation, Gary Shaughnessy. Gary, thank you for being with us. Tell us, what is the Z Zurich Foundation doing right now to support the people in Ukraine?
Well, like many organisations and many people, our immediate focus and instinct was around the humanitarian issues, and that's absolutely right. So we've supported funding, our people have sent clothes, many of our people, in fact, have supported registration of people to come and live in their houses and flee from the situation that's in Ukraine itself. Obviously, we've been working with local agencies on the ground immediately, but the next step for us is the mental health issues that come with that.
And that is a major priority, isn't it? Looking at the mental and the psychosocial support that is required there.
Absolutely it is. We're launching with UNICEF, a coalition of the willing, if you like, the Global Coalition for Youth Mental Health, Youth Mental Wellbeing, really aimed at making sure that 30 million people in 30 countries by 2030 are given the support they need, so that no one ever needs to say again that they can't express their feelings, that they can't share their concerns, and they can't get the mental health support that they need.
It's very ambitious, isn't it? The Global Coalition for Youth Mental Wellbeing. You're saying it'll reach some 30 million people. How long are you expecting this coalition, this ambitious project to go for?
Well, we've aimed for 2030, but in reality, this is about all of us getting together. And some of this is about funding, but most of it's actually about attitude. And we see that companies across the world working with people in individual countries can make a real difference. Make it safe for people to talk about their feelings, make it safe for people to express their concerns, and make it safe for them to do so early when they can be helped to the greatest extent in the quickest way possible. 1 in 7 young people in the world have a mental health condition at one point in time. That's a huge number, and it's something we really have to do something about.
How and what can people do to try and support this global coalition?
Well, as I say, funding is one thing, and UNICEF are launching the campaign straight away, but it's also about the attitude and the involvement that you have as an individual. It's so easy to throw away the little comment that says, you'll be all right, stick with it, get through it, rather than actually dealing with, engaging with people and helping recognize this is important. It's not a trivial issue. And actually, I think it's an issue now. It's not an issue for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years time. It's an issue now. And it's a massive issue when the youth of our world don't believe in the future of our world.
important work that's being done here. Gary, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
It is heartening to hear about such an important initiative, and a reminder that if you want to find out more, please do visit the UNICEF website on the banner below. And thank you very much to all our contributors, Mario Greco, Martin Bell, Carla, Haddad, Mardini, as well as Gary Shaughnessy. These are incredibly difficult times for the millions of Ukrainians fleeing bombardment, particularly the children. We heard there about the devastating impact that the war in Ukraine is having on the mental health of those caught up in this crisis, especially young people. But it is also natural for all of us to feel concerned and worried about what is going on in the world. We have instability on the world stage and, of course, have just emerged from the recent pandemic. And as workplaces adapt to the changes brought by the pandemic, one thing remains certain: companies need to take responsibility for the health and well-being of their people and recognize that employees are their most valuable asset. So, how has life changed over the last few years, and how much does global uncertainty and change impact our emotional well-being? Take a look at this film.
All that is happening in the world with COVID and of course the war, it's taking a big impact on everyone in all aspects of life.
The thing that I'm most concerned about is, the future for my children, basically. What happens this year, what impact does it have on them because they're still quite young?
It's changed my life completely. It's also affected my family dynamics. I lost my mother this past August.
I was introduced into the pandemic when I was a senior in high school, so I didn't get to have that last year experience.
I mean, we've just been under a huge amount of stress. Our idea of what we thought our lives would always feel like, all of a sudden that got disrupted and the rug got pulled out from underneath us.
Sustainability has probably the biggest link to people's health and well-being. I mean, we're talking about food and water and shelter, the most basic things that humans need. My mental health is affected by the understanding that our world is in crisis.
Since I was little, I was always anxious in terms of feeling an agony, wanting things to be perfect and wanting to be in control of things.
I would absolutely not work for a company that doesn't provide the right conditions and environment. I think that's key to our physical health and all the other factors that are important for our mental well-being.
I mean, without your health, what do you have? Without mental or physical, what value do you bring to a company?
I am 19 myself, so my generation and my peers and everyone around me, we're very focused on mental health because at the end of the day, if you're not healthy, you're not really going to succeed as much as you can. You're not going to have your true potential.
I do feel hopeful about everyone's emotional well-being. I believe that all of us want to get out of the screen and back in person, so I think that's the next step.
As you see there, people are learning to navigate through these uncertain times and are paying a particular attention to their emotional well-being and mental health. So how can we foster a society, a culture, and a workplace which recognizes the importance of this and, crucially, supports each person as they face life's challenges? Well, joining me now to discuss more about this is Dr. Suzan Song, who specializes in adolescent and family psychiatry at the George Washington University in DC. She is also an advisor to the U.S. State Department. Kathleen Savio, Group Chief Transformation Officer at Zurich. She also sits on the board of the Zurich Foundation. Dr. Joanna Lai is UNICEF's Adolescent Health Specialist, and Cynthia Hansen, Managing Director of the Innovation Foundation at the Greco Group. Welcome to you all. Dr. Song, I'd like to start with you. You know, we've all been feeling it. Whether you watch the news, however you consume news and information this day, we are bombarded with so much. And then, of course, we've had 2 years of a global pandemic that has impacted all of us directly. It seems as though all of this put together, and also, you know, the pressures of modern living, creates a perfect storm, if you will, when it comes to how we deal with and our mental and emotional well-being, or how it affects us. Talk to us a little bit about that.
When most people think about, what we need for good mental health and well-being, we think about stability, predictability, security, because that gives us a sense of control. But when we have the threats of a pandemic with new variants, or floods and fires, or armed conflict and wars, in addition to our everyday relationship stress and work conflict, it becomes a threat to our very sense of stability and control in our lives and our future. Now, stress is a natural part of life, right? So our bodies respond with a surge of hormones that help us adapt, the stress resolves, and our bodies return to baseline. But in the past few years, we've had the stress that's gone on and on and on. It's harder to recover because the uncertainty continues. So we're in this long, slow burn without a clear end in sight, and not a clear idea of what the end will actually look like.
Kathleen, there was a time when, we would go to work, we would leave our emotions and feelings behind at home and come to work and focus on the job at hand. Talk to me about how at Zurich there is this idea and this practice of recognizing the whole person when they come into the office.
Absolutely, and your point is well taken. The combination of certainly all the things that are happening now, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's all kinds of geopolitical events, on top of what was already going on in the work environment for people that's been developing for a number of years. All of these things combine, and we try to take a step back and say, how do we recognize the impact that this has on our people? How do we think about wellness? So we've developed a framework around how we think about wellness that has 4 aspects to that. And that's certainly people's physical wellness, it's their mental wellness, we think about social wellness, and then we also think about financial wellness.
Cynthia, from practical perspective, I understand that actually Greco has partnered with the University of Zurich in this research where you talk about the emotional well-being of employees and actually what that means on a practical level, also when you look at productivity as well. And there's an interesting term that I read, it was called organizational emotional intelligence. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So this really stemmed from the fact that emotions are part of that idea of being able to bring your whole self to work, and that actually most companies are not dealing specifically with emotions, not measuring, and therefore not taking action to actually facilitate how people manage emotions, how you can actually then harness emotions in terms of keeping people engaged, keeping them motivated, helping people see common goals and work together. So this idea of an emotionally intelligent organization is about an organization that is open to measuring and taking action around people's emotions and not pretending that there is this barrier between what you do at work and who you are at work and who you are in your private life.
The interesting thing is, Joanna, is that the younger generation, they're the ones that are really driving this change because there is an understanding, or actually perhaps we're seeing how mental health is such an important factor in their health and well-being, and they are addressing that more.
Yeah, I mean, adolescence, if we think about it, and into young adulthood is such a profound period of development where a child is transitioning physiologically, cognitively, psychosocially to being an adult. And we see that 50% of mental health conditions begin by age 14 now, and that 75% by the mid-20s, which shows us that as they go through this rapid time of change, in addition to these daily stressors that you guys are talking about, from puberty to young adulthood, that all young people really universally need the support and the guidance to help them move away from risks and towards positive trajectories.
Dr. Song, I mean, we all know that when it comes to our health, when it comes to our emotional health, our mental health, part of our healing and process of healing is support, isn't it?
It is such a good point because there's so much talk about self-care and self-regulation of emotions. But a total reliance on oneself doesn't work, right? We've evolved to co-regulate our emotions with others. And this is shown within the workforce, within our families. We get a little bit more irritable, a little more short-tempered. So one thing we can do is to focus on the repair. So instead of focusing on the tear in the relationship because we are short-tempered or irritable, which we should expect, it's a stress response, we focus on the repair. How can we build and repair these relationships throughout our lives in multiple contexts?
I think it's an important thing to also bring up, Cynthia, is that the reality is most people are reluctant to talk about mental health at work because of repercussions, because of perceptions. What are you seeing companies do that actually help to open up that doorway of conversation so that it makes it okay for people to talk about what is causing them that mental ill health?
I think there are basically two things. One is raising awareness across the entire company and building a culture where it's okay to talk about mental health. And then the other piece is making sure that managers in particular have the skills to deal with mental health issues and to keep an eye out. So it's not just enough to be aware, but also to feel empowered to watch for signals, to know how to refer someone or how to open a conversation.
And this is a question I'd like to ask from an individual perspective. We have, good days and bad days. Our mental health is a journey. We how we learn to deal with it, how we learn to cope. It becomes part of our own educational response. And that's the same for organizations as well. Kathleen, let me ask you about that. It is a journey after all, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's a journey. I think that idea of all of us recognizing that as human beings, we are facing these different challenges and stresses, but that we can be there for one another. And I even take it a step further and think about the things that companies are doing for their customers in order to be able to support their employees. So for us, we have a solution, I'll call it, called Live Well. And basically it's a digital app, a state-of-the-art solution that actually helps people understand and take charge of their own health and their own well-being. It's a holistic solution offering you things like daily monitoring, nudging, things that can help you as an individual both detect things that are going on with your own health and then prevent some of the negative outcomes that could be there. So again, this idea of not being able to do this all on our own, but there are solutions that you can use. They may be digital solutions or just looking to one another.
Dr. Song, I just wanted to quickly ask you, what should be the one thing that we should remember? Like I said, there are times when we have good days, bad days. What should we remember that'll help keep us on track?
I would say, I think it's to embrace the instability that's inherent in our lives. And I know that sounds a little strange, but so much of our stress and our shame around mental health issues, the full spectrum of mental health issues, is because we feel like we shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like this. We should be more, quote, stable. But change and uncertainties are a part of the fabric of our lives. So we need to embrace them and ask, okay, what are these instabilities teaching us about our values? Beliefs and values, they're just words. They mean nothing without action. So we can act to say, okay, let's commit our beliefs to truth through our actions. Because right now, people are going through an existential crisis. I'm hearing so many people asking, who am I? What am I here for? What should I be working on? How should I be using my time? And so we can let a lot of these instabilities inherent in our lives actually be our guiding North Star as to how we should be living out our futures.
Thank you, Kathleen Savio, Dr. Suzan Song, Cynthia Hansen, and Joanne Lai. And thank you all so much for joining us for this Zurich talk on emotional well-being, navigating uncertainty. It is harrowing to witness a war in Europe and the pain and anguish this inflicts upon innocent civilians. Remember, you can find out more about UNICEF's incredible work and how Zurich are supporting this. Please visit the UNICEF website on the banner below. From me and the team at Zurich, thank you very much for watching.